Okay, hi everybody. This is Danielle Karapkin speaking to you from the Bayit in Thornhill, Ontario, where we are studying Moreh Nevukhim, Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, for webyeshiva.org. And welcome everybody after an absence. A group of Canadians traveled to Eretz Yisrael to be able to do whatever we could to help in the war effort, and may our Torah study, even from afar, provide merit to all of Achenu B'nai Yisrael. May God watch over our Chayalim, our soldiers, and free the hostages very, very quickly. We are studying now chapter 27 in section 3 of the guide. Let's just get our bearings as to where we are. We had mentioned already when we started studying chapter 26 that we are at a point in the guide where the Rambam has launched into a discussion of the bodily commandments of the mitzvot, their purpose, their function, their structure, why God gave us the mitzvot, what he hopes to accomplish through the giving of the mitzvot. The Rambam had introduced us to one very significant chidush, one significant novelty of an idea, which is somewhat controversial. And let me just bring up my screen so we can review that together. If you'd ever like to be able to download the handouts that I display on the screen, they're available in two places. One is in the course description on webyeshiva.org, and the other one is in the Facebook group, Shiur in Moreh Nevukhim. And you can always join that and sign up for that and get information updates about when we are having class. So in chapter 26, the Rambam had innovated the idea that not all of the details of the mitzvot are inherently purposeful. I want to remind you that we created a very significant contrast between the view of the Rambam and that of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in the Kuzari as far as what happens when a person does a mitzvah. Is there something metaphysical that takes place that interacts both with the individual and perhaps in the entire fabric of reality that creates some kind of ontological change through the performance of that mitzvah? The Rambam is of the belief that the purpose of the mitzvah is to benefit the practitioner, and he doesn't have anything to say about whether there's anything inherent in that mitzvah that changes anything else in the fabric of existence, other than having a psychological, emotional, and intellectual effect on the person himself or herself who's doing the mitzvah. And as a result, the Rambam came to the conclusion that each mitzvah in general is purposeful, but some of the details of the individual mitzvot were required solely to create uniformity within Jewish society. And the example that we gave from when we studied chapter 26 is that God gave us a mitzvah of shaking agricultural products on Sukkot. Why did he choose an etrog and not a lemon? There's a need for uniformity of practice. So if some people would take one kind of fruit and some other people would take another kind of fruit, there would not be uniformity, and it would be too much of a loosely practiced religion and every practitioner would be practicing a religion of one instead of a communal religious experience. And so what the Rambam says, and it's quite jarring when you first hear it, is that every mitzvah has purpose, but not every detail of every mitzvah may necessarily have purpose other than creating uniform social religious practice. In this chapter, the Rambam will present another chidush, another innovation that in some ways connects to the prior chapter. And that is that A, some mitzvot were given to structure a healthy and moral society, which ultimately benefits man's physical health. And B, once man has a healthy physical existence, he can practice other mitzvot that were given to perfect man's soul slash intellect. And the reason why I say soul slash intellect, because it becomes clear from the discussion in the text, when the Rambam makes reference to the soul, he's referring to the man's intellectual being, that part of the man that exists potentially immortally after he passes away, which from an Aristotelian point of view, which is what the Rambam's worldview is, the only thing that remains after we die are not our mannerisms, are not necessarily our memories of relationships and anything like that. Pure intellect, the knowledge that we have accumulated about God and his universe, is that which remains of us after we die. Now, this idea dovetails with the previous chapter, in that unlike Rebbe Yehuda Halevi, there is no inherent value to some of the mitzvot's details. Rather, the mitzvot are a means to a greater end. And it's important for us, and we're going to be repeating this idea because it's so novel, it may take time to fully digest it. The Rambam does not believe that the mitzvot were given qua mitzvot. The Rambam believes that the mitzvot were given to the Jewish people as a means to perfecting our intellect. This, in turn, is the key to immortality in the world to come. Man's perfected intellect is what gains a person entry into the world to come. It is not a lifetime of performance of good deeds, of living a life of valor and integrity, but rather the key to immortality for the Rambam is a perfected mind, is a perfected um, uh, 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 consciousness that is filled with correct ideas of God and existence. Okay, so again, very Aristotelian in its approach, and it may be somewhat jarring for someone who's just coming into this for the first time. So the Rambam opens this chapter by classifying two types of mitzvot, and I guess I should point out that from time immemorial, our great rabbis and later commentators have always been classifying and categorizing different types of mitzvot. We're used to the categorization of, let's say, mitzvot aseh and mitzvot lo taseh, positive commandments versus negative commandments. We're used to mitzvot sheben adam lamakom versus mitzvot sheben adam lachavero, commandments that relate vertically between man and God exclusively, and commandments that relate to man and his relationship to his fellow man. But curiously, the Rambam provides a new form of categorization that I'm not familiar that anyone else uh, 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 does, which is to categorize them as two different types: mitzvot that perfect the soul/intellect, and mitzvot that perfect the body of the human being. But understand that it's quite clear from the very outset of this chapter that the Rambam's attitude is that God gave us the commandments to benefit the human condition, to make us into the best possible versions of ourselves that we can be. Each person has unique capacity. No two people have the same capacity, but through a lifetime of observance of the Torah, the hope is that we will become the best version of who we could potentially become. Now, since the human being is a hybrid of body and soul, man has to perfect his body, and only through perfecting the body can he then perfect his soul. That's the process. Regarding the soul mitzvot, these are mitzvot whose purpose are to imbue man with proper opinions, each person based on his or her own capacity. Some mitzvot present this objective explicitly. That is to say, the mitzvah teaches a certain concept that one needs to internalize in one's intellect. So, for example, if I'm doing a mitzvah, let's say, of Sabbath observance, that may have an inherent intellectual lesson about the way that God behaves and interacts with the universe. It reminds me that God is the creator and that the world was created ex nihilo from absolute nothingness. Or my observance of kashrut may teach me some other kind of intellectual lesson. It's going to be at least challenging at the outset to come up with many, multiple different examples without looking at the later chapters to see how the Rambam is going to unfold almost every single mitzvah in the Torah and tell us, or at least the categories of mitzvot in the Torah, and tell us how each mitzvah is there to teach some kind of, or at least some mitzvot are there to teach man some kind of intellectual lesson that will allow his mind to become perfected. Some of those mitzvot are not presented with the lesson, the intellectual lesson implicitly present, but sometimes the mitzvot will be presented in parables. And as Kreskes says, this is not referring to any one of the 613 commandments, but rather refers to the esoteric ideas conveyed in the Torah in the first few chapters of Genesis, which talk about the story of creation. In other words, according to the commentators of the Rambam, The Rambam is not referring specifically just to the 613 commandments here. There are many concepts that are presented in the Torah that are there to perfect man's intellect. Some of them are bodily mitzvot that a man can put into practice, and other times they are passages in the Torah that when a person reads them, when a person studies these ideas that are contained in the Torah, even if they're not associated with a mitzvah, he becomes enhanced in his intellect and therefore becomes more perfected. The other category of mitzvot are those mitzvot that perfect the body. Now, it's important to note that what the Rambam is noting here is that that's synonymous with mitzvot that are designed to structure a healthy society. For the Rambam, those two go hand in hand. The only way that I can be physically healthy is if I am living in a properly structured society. And we'll explain why that is in just a second. This social structuring is done in two ways. Number one, man is commanded to avoid certain actions that are harmful to the collective, such as murder and theft, obviously. And number two, man is commanded to behave in certain ways that engender morality, which allows society to thrive, such as charity, tithing, etc. Now, if you'll notice, the Rambam categorizes moral behavior and moral dispositions within a human being not in the category of a perfected intellect, but rather in the category of a perfected body. Within the idea that I need to be a healthy human being is that I need to be healthy physically, and I also need to be healthy psychologically, which means in my attitudes, in my emotional attitudes, in my dispositions of, let's say, my midot tovot, my good attributes of being benevolent and kind and thinking well of other people and just having a healthy disposition psychologically. That's completely independent of a perfected intellect. A perfected intellect is when I have perfect knowledge of existence, including God. The body mitzvot includes even my psychological well-being, two totally different categories. Okay, so it's really quite interesting. This is a very Aristotelian approach that within the intellect itself, the intellect, when we refer to the soul or the intellect, we're referring to the portion of man that remains immortal. My psychological dispositions, my emotional health, shall we say, is not part of my immortal soul. That's really rather for the Rambam more part of my bodily existence that I'm able to get along with people. I'm well adjusted psychologically and so forth. So let's go on. Now that we've divided the mitzvot in two different categories, the soul mitzvot that perfect the intellect and the body mitzvot that allow man to have a healthy disposition, both physically and emotionally. Now let's talk about the relationship between those two categories of mitzvot. Mitzvot that perfect the soul are of a higher nobility than mitzvot that perfect the body, meaning that the mitzvot that perfect the body are really a means to get a person to do those mitzvot that perfect the soul. Because again, the end game here is for man to perfect his soul. It's not to perfect the body, because at the end of the day, your body will exist for up to 120 years, God willing, but then it'll be gone and there'll be nothing left of the body. So really, the whole idea or the whole objective of perfecting the body is so that you have the ability now to work on perfecting your soul. And the Rambam will say this explicitly. At the same time, we need to discuss the mitzvot that perfect the body first, since they necessarily and chronologically precede the soul mitzvot. I have to be able to have a healthy body and a healthy emotional state before I can start working on perfecting my soul. So that's the idea that the Rambam wants to present. So I'm going to, even though the primary objective is the soul mitzvot, I must talk about the body mitzvot first because they precede the soul mitzvot. They're a necessary prerequisite to having a healthy soul. And that is why you will find that the body mitzvot are more expanded upon in all their detail in the Torah. And the Rambam will go through a replete list of those kinds of mitzvot that are what we call body mitzvot, mitzvot designed to perfect the body. The reason why the body mitzvot are linked to social structure is because they provide a man with a healthy body and a healthy emotional state. For a man to be healthy, He needs food, shelter, hygiene, and so forth, and obviously good social interaction. No one individual can provide for himself without living within a society. Because, as the Rambam has already stated back in section 1 of the guide, no human being, there's some of these reality TV shows today that talk, Survivor and things like that, where people are sent out into the wild to see how long they can survive. But the Rambam had told us quite some time ago in the guide that man is unlike the animals of the wild, where as the animals of the wild can fend for themselves in the wild, generally speaking, human beings cannot really successfully survive in the wild. They need to be part of a social structure because the needs of a human being are such that you need some people dedicated to farming, some people dedicated to building, some people dedicated to education, and so forth. And so you really can't have all of that contained within one person. You need social structures so that you'll have specializations within different people and they will contribute their skills to the collective. And that's how societies flourish. And that's why man needs social structures in order to have a healthy body. I can't be expected to plant all of my food, to slaughter, to hunt all of my animals, to build my own home, etc., 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 and to be able to live a fulfilling life that is filled with pleasure and happiness, because I'll constantly be running from one thing to the next. And we quote here what the Rambam had written back in chapter 72 of section 1, and you can find it in the Pines edition on pages 190 and 191, even though we're quoting from the Friedlander translation just because it's easier since it's online to cut and paste. An animal does not require for its sustenance any plan, thought, or scheme. Each animal moves and acts by its nature, eats as much as it can find of suitable things. It makes its resting place wherever it happens to be, cohabits with any mate it meets while in heat and the periods of its excitement. In this manner does each individual conserve itself for a certain time, and perpetuates the existence of its species without requiring for its maintenance the assistance or support of any of its fellow creatures. For all the things to which it has to attend, it performs by itself. But with man, it's different. If an individual had a solitary existence and were like an animal left without guidance, he would soon perish. He would not endure even one day unless it were by mere chance, unless he happened to find something upon which he might feed. For the food which man requires for his subsistence demands much more work and preparation, which can only be accomplished by reflection and by plan. Many vessels must be used, and many individuals, each in his peculiar work or skill, must be employed. It is therefore necessary that one person should organize the work and direct men in such a manner that they should properly cooperate and that they should assist each other. Thus, as we know, as the Rambam says in a number of times in the guide, man is political, or really the word political means social. Man is a social animal. He's political by nature. Man can only thrive within a social collective. And therefore, whenever we talk about the bodily mitzvot, what those mitzvot that are necessary for man to be healthy physically and emotionally, that goes hand in hand with those mitzvot that are designed to create proper political and social structure within a society. So as we will hopefully see very shortly, when the Rambam starts to address specific mitzvot, we will see what kind of mitzvot the Rambam is talking about. But that's one category of which there is extensive detailing in the Torah about those types of mitzvot. Man, however, ultimately perfects himself through activating his intellect. That is knowing, and I'm just quoting here from the Pines edition, knowing everything concerning all the beings that it is within the capacity of man to know, in accordance with his ultimate perfection. Like we started off today with saying, although each person has unique capacities, some more and some less, each person can perfect himself based on his unique station. This perfection is independent of any physical act or moral quality. At the same time, man cannot achieve that ultimate state of active intellect unless he has first established physical health and moral development, which is what the purpose of the body mitzvot is. For no man can perfect his intellect when in a state of hunger, cold, and so forth. That's the reason why Hashem gave us mitzvot, to make sure that our physical and emotional well-being is attended to, because only then and only then Can we work on perfecting our intellect? But intellectual perfection is undoubtedly more noble and is the only cause of permanent preservation. And now those words are very, very important because the Rambam is essentially saying what I had suggested at the beginning, which is man can only achieve immortality through through accumulating certain ideas within his mind. And once a person has past a certain threshold of the accumulation of ideas intellectually, that will make him immortal. And it has to do with this idea that we've been speaking about over many, many months about this concept called the active intellect, where man can actually conjoin with some kind of independent intellectual force field that exists in the cosmos. And that's the key to immortality. Again, based on Aristotle's writings, but this is so unconventional from the traditional way that we view how a human being gains immortality. Normally, when we learn the Mishnah, which says, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek lo'olam haba, all of Israel have a portion in the world to come, we normally think that that means is that because every Jew has possesses a certain degree of righteousness, they've done a lifetime of mitzvot, and so therefore they have achieved enough points to get into the world to come. But for the Rambam, it's not that way. For the Rambam, it is because every Jew has the entree by dint of the Torah that was given to us to accumulate proper thinking in his mind, such that he's because the mind is the only thing that exists eternally after we die. That is the key to immortality. That is the key to Olam Haba. This is a very controversial thing for a number of reasons. One of them being is that this implies that in Olam Haba there is no bodily existence. And the Rambam actually says that explicitly in the Mishneh Torah and in other places. It got him into trouble to the point where he needed to write a special letter called the Igeret Tchiyat HaMetim towards the end of his life to clarify his position, because the rabbis seem to suggest otherwise. That the Talmud seems to say that in the world to come there will be a reuniting between body and soul. But for the Rambam, eternity of Olam Haba is purely for the soul. And we're not going to go into that right now. We've spoken about it before, and I'm sure we'll revisit that sometime in the future. But it's also interesting that because the Rambam maintains that the key to immortality, to Olam Haba, is the acquisition of proper ideas, it is for that very reason that if you look at his Mishnah commentary on that Mishnah in Sanhedrin, which says that all of Israel has a portion in the world to come, that is exactly the place where the Rambam details his Shalosha Asar Ikarim, his 13 principles of faith. Now, why is it important for the Rambam to detail his series of doctrinal teachings that this is what every Jew has to believe? Every Jew has to have harbor a knowledge and an understanding of these 13 principles of faith about God and about prophecy and about reward and punishment. Why does the Rambam address that issue, the issue of dogma within Judaism, in a discussion of Olam Haba? Now we understand, because for the Rambam, harboring correct beliefs and thoughts is the key to the world to come. Not the performance of mitzvot, but rather what the performance of mitzvot helps to contribute to a person's proper thinking. And so it is at least just as important to harbor the 13 principles of faith in one's thoughts as it is to perform mitzvot for the Rambam, because that too is necessary in order to acquire the immortality of the world to come. Let's go on to the final point, and then we'll be done for the day. The Torah of Moses is absolutely unique in this sense, that is to say, in contrast with other legal systems, in that it brings us both perfections, that of the body and that of the soul. That is to say, it brings the welfare of the state, which leads to physical health and moral values, and that in turn leads to the perfection of the intellect, through which ultimate perfection is achieved. Now, this is a recapitulation of what the Rambam had written in section 2 of the guide, chapter 40, when he was talking about the whole idea of the Torah of Moses as being the ultimate prophetic gift that was given to man. I'm just reading here from a snippet from chapter 40 in section 2, again using the Friedlander translation. You will find that the sole object of certain laws that are given by other governments in accordance with the intention of their author, who well considered their effect, is to establish the good order of the state and its affairs, to free it from all mischief and wrong, let's say, laws that require that people not steal from each other and so forth. These laws do not deal with philosophic problems, contain no teaching for the perfecting of our logical faculties, and are not concerned about the existence of sound or unsound opinions. Their sole object is to arrange, under all circumstances, the relations of men to each other and to secure their well-being in accordance with the view of the author of these laws. These laws are therefore political, and their author belongs, as has been stated above, to the third class, namely to those who only distinguish themselves by the perfection of their imaginative faculties. They're not interested in perfecting their intellects, they're just interested in structuring society properly. You will also find laws which in all of their rules aim, as the law just mentioned, at the improvement of the material interests of the people, but besides tend to improve the state of the faith of man, to create the first correct notions of God and of angels, and to lead then the people by instruction and education to an accurate knowledge of the universe. This kind of education, which not only is concerned about the political structuring of society, but is also focused on imbuing man with proper ideas, that comes from God. Those laws are divine. That's the uniqueness of the Torah, that it focuses both on proper social structures, but also not just don't steal and don't kill because that will help you live a happy life within society, but also don't kill and don't steal because by developing proper physical health and moral virtues, you will be able now to perfect your intellect, which is the other portion of the Torah. These two objectives, says the Rambam, are alluded to in the following verse. The Torah says in Deuteronomy chapter 6, Vayitzavenu Hashem la'asot, God commanded us to do all of these statutes. Li'yirat Hashem Elokeinu, in order to revere the Lord our God. And then the Torah says for two reasons. L'tov lanu kol hayamim, to be able to benefit us for all the days, and l'chayotenu kahayom hazeh, and to give us life such as this day. And the Rambam says that those two phrases, L'tov lanu kol hayamim, refers to the eternal well-being that is obtained through the soul, and l'chayotenu kahayom hazeh refers to the ability to thrive in this world. And we know that the words Litov Lanu is the code word for the world to come, for immortality, and especially because it says Kol Hayamim, all the days. And that's based on the fact that the Torah elsewhere says, Laman Yitav Lach v'harachta Yamim, you shall send away the mother bird before taking the eggs, the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKain. Why? So that it will be good for you and you will have length of days. And as the Talmud in Kiddushin and other places states, that this doesn't mean that if a person sends away the mother bird, they'll live an unusually long life in this world, because there are situations, and the Gemara actually records a case where a father told his son to go and climb up a ladder, shoo away the mother bird and take the eggs. And tragically, the child went up the ladder, fell off the ladder, died while he was in the midst of doing two mitzvot, where the Torah says that it'll be good for you and you will have length of days. So how do we reconcile that? Because Laman Yitav Lach does not mean length of days in this world, but it means in the world to come. And that's how the Rambam says, I know that that's what the Torah is alluding to when it uses these two phrases. L'tov lanu means that you will have length of days in the world to come. You will have eternal life because you have done the soul commandments, what he's called those mitzvot which perfect the intellect, and you will have also done the prerequisite to those mitzvot, which are the bodily mitzvot, the socially directed mitzvot that help structure society properly, and that will give you life in this world. Okay, and that's really the way the Rambam completes the chapter, and I think that's where we're going to hold it for today, because we've sort of gotten this overview of how, in a very, very one might suggest even very daring way that the Rambam has presented the mitzvot, the ultimate objective of our life of studying and observing the Torah is for the sake of perfecting our soul, i.e. our intellect, so that we may gain immortality and merit the world to come. That's the content of this chapter. Any comments or questions before we call it a day?
Look at the chat.
Look at the chat. Okay, so I'm going to close my share, and let me look at the chat. Okay. Okay, let's see. Kol Yemei Chayecha. Okay, I'm sorry for not having. Okay. So the etrog per se
It's
is
to
not
keep me
needed as
from
such.
interrupting. It's right there. So my thoughts all go in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So the etrog per se is not needed as such, but etrogim are common in Israel. So this gave it uniformity among the people. Presumably so. Yes, God may have chosen a specific fruit that was so ubiquitous within the land that it would make it easier for people to have a uniformly practiced mitzvah.
I mean, we look at it from a galut perspective that it's hard for us to get an etrog because they don't grow wild in the United States.
Right. Correct.
But
Yes, the Gemara
when
actually
totally
says
different
that.
for Israel.
Yeah, the Gemara says that the etrog is a very accessible fruit in Eretz Yisrael. That's absolutely correct. So does the Rambam say that in Olam Haba we won't recognize our parents and grandparents? I think that the Rambam is not at all a sentimentalist. The Rambam does not feel that Olam Haba is a place where we're reunited with family.
I mean,
I
he
think
just want to see his brother again, find out what happened on the ship.
Yeah, I mean, he speaks up so lovingly about his brother. We've seen that in previous chapters. But at the same time, the Rambam feels that to be a proper philosopher, one must be divested of all of that, all of those human emotions. Really, the function of Olam Haba is to be connected exclusively to God through the pure coldness of the intellect and not through the attachments that we made in this world. Okay, so
I prefer to think that our family's going to be there too, and we'll all be at the shulchan of Hashem.
well, you may be right, but all I can tell you is this is the way I'm reading the Rambam.
Right. No, this is
Yeah.
what Rambam says, and that's
Yeah.
what we're learning.
Yeah. So, that's what you're alluding to is the reason why that whenever you read the Rambam, especially in his discussion of Olam Haba, it's also important to sort of balance that with some of the other commentaries that are from the more mystical tradition because they provide us a greater sense of humanity.
Like
And
Ramban.
a way of associating ourselves to Olam Haba in a completely different way. So you'll find many times that in our course, we compare and contrast Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and the Rambam, two people who were
Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is definitely a little more on the
almost contemporaries, and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was more part of the mystical, romantic tradition, emotional tradition. So,
yeah.
keep that in mind.
Rambam says, would Rambam say that the only purpose of this world is to perfect your intellect for Olam Haba, or not to perfect your soul? That's
Yes.
what he would say.
Yes, he would say that that's the purpose of human existence. He doesn't say that as far as that's the purpose of all of existence, but that's the purpose of human existence, and that's the reason why God gave us the mitzvot for that ultimate objective. Yeah.
Perfect the soul.
To perfect the soul, but the soul for the Rambam is the intellect. It's the part of my mind that harbors correct ideas, correct knowledge of things.
Like it says in Aleinu.
Okay, but that's not the that's not a Maimonides.
Oh, I know it's not in the Torah. It's just in Aleinu.
Okay, folks, we're going to hold it here, and let me wish you a good week. And Bezrat Hashem will continue next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.